Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own One for the Heart or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
One for the Heart. The moment the bellwether unit steps off the convoy, something to Sarah feels off. There is a tiny, nagging feeling in the back of her mind, buzzing and prodding, and something sparks down Sarah's spine the moment she sees Nicta dragged out of the convoy behind them. Her biddies all hiss instantly, Sarah's lip curling in disgust and outrage at the sight of the spree leader, alive. And Nicta's eyes are wide, frantically darting around as she takes in her surroundings. And if Sarah didn't know any better, she would say that the woman looks scared. Good. She hopes she is terrified. The bellwether unit look tired. Abigail and Rael, at least, seem to have a sort of weary satisfaction about them, proudly bumping each other's shoulders as they get information. But Tally... Something further nags in Sarah's mind as she looks at Tally, as if she is seeing her for the first time. She has seen many different versions of Tally Craven, the wide-eyed and hopeful recruit sitting in the auditorium as she watched Sarah give a speech in person for the very first time. The bright-eyed and passionate Tally that she had, to both of their surprise, ended the reel with at Beltane only a few short months ago. The distrustful Tally, who looked at her with weary and heartbroken eyes after the events of City Drop. The Tally who had sacrificed herself for Sarah to become a biddy. The Tally who finally learned to trust her again after Sarah gave her youth back. The Tally who would laugh and smile brightly and kiss Sarah so fiercely that for those precious few moments, Sarah would feel as if everything were right in the world. The Tally that Sarah thought could maybe love her back, could maybe want something more than just the occasional night in Sarah's bed, at least until she had so foolishly allowed the secrets of her past to come between them, to push Tally away. She has never seen this Tally before. This Tally is angry. This Tally is furious, and she is staring at Sarah like she is someone that she doesn't even recognize. And the fire burning in Tally's eyes is so strong that Sarah's mouth goes dry with the taste of ash, feeling as if smoke has filled her lungs, making it difficult to breathe. Tally stumps along with her sisters and the rest of the soldiers as Sarah makes her speech, almost completely unaware of what she is saying. Nicta will pay for her crimes, she hears herself say, staring at the spree leader, making her disgust clear in her tone and on her face. And the nagging, buzzing feeling in the back of her mind sharpens with a brief, harsh burst, and she winces slightly, bringing up a hand to rub at her temple. "General," Anacostia asks, as she steps forward to lay a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder, looking at her in concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah grits out, straightening, and it isn't until the soldiers start to drag the kicking and panicked Nicta away, her screams of protest muffled by the muzzle she is still currently wearing, does the buzzing in Sarah's mind subside. She looks to Anacostia, not quite able to bring herself to look over at Tally again, even though she can still feel the heat of her gaze burning into the side of her face. Make sure the bellwether unit gets checked over in the infirmary. Yes, ma'am, Anacostia says instantly, and she grabs Sarah's arm before she can turn away. Are you sure you're okay, ma'am? She asks, clearly concerned, warm brown eyes looking Sarah up and down, and Sarah risks a glance in the direction of the bellwether unit. Tally is still staring at her, face still set in stone as the fire burns behind her eyes, and for the first time since they have met, Sarah doesn't recognize the woman she is looking at. She doesn't know who it is, but it isn't her Tally. She swallows, mouth ash dry, and turns back to Anacostia. I'm fine. The interrogation doesn't go as planned. They don't even get to do any actual interrogating. Sarah watches with Petra and President Wade as two soldiers enter the cell with Nicta, still muzzled, and they slip the work-suppressant collar around her neck as they prepare to remove the muzzle. The entire time Sarah's skin is crawling, and the nagging sense of something being wrong is still present, buzzing around in her mind. And the moment the muzzle comes off, Nicta begins to scream. Sarah's knees hit the ground, and her throat closes up, and she can't breathe, can't see, can't hear anything over Nicta screaming. But somehow the buzzing in her brain is even louder than that, a poking, prodding feeling of wrongness. Sarah's eyes roll back into her head, and she collapses the rest of the way to the ground, the room in chaos around her as Petra yells out an order to put that damn muzzle back on her now, and the last thing that Sarah is aware of before she blacks out, barely noticeable over the buzzing and the poking and the prodding in her mind, is something faint, something foreign and yet familiar, something that feels like a cry for help. When Sarah wakes again, it is to several alarming discoveries. 1. Nicta had somehow been able to perform work with the suppressant collar on. Wade had deemed her too dangerous to attempt interrogating again, and had already signed the execution order. 2. Whatever it was that Nicta had done to Sarah, it had somehow not affected the biddies, and Sarah is both relieved and concerned by this information. It is the third and final piece of information that alarms Sarah the most, however, that has her pushing off of the bed in the warding circle and hurrying across the base, despite Isadora's worried protests otherwise. The same moment they had taken the muzzle off of Nicta and Sarah had collapsed to the ground, all the way across base in a classroom, Tally Craven had collapsed to the ground as well. When Sarah reaches the infirmary, palms sweating and heart in her throat, she sees Tally sitting on a bed, surrounded by her sisters. None of them seem to notice her, and before she can even begin to make her way over to them, Colonel Wick is stopping her. "Are you here to see Cadet Craven, ma'am?" the fixer asks, and Sarah is barely able to do anything more than nod. "Is it a military matter?" Sarah has to force her words around the lump lodged in her throat. "No, I just came to make sure she is all right." "Then I am afraid I cannot let you in the room to see her," Wick says, and Sarah balks at her. "Excuse me?" "I am sorry, General," Wick says, and to her credit, she does look sorry. "But since it is not a military matter, I have to respect the wishes of the patient." "What wishes?" Sarah asks, confused, and Colonel Wick looks uncomfortably away from Sarah to look at the 3 cadets, and Sarah makes the mistake of following her gaze. Tally is looking at her like she did the night before, all fire and anger, and Sarah feels rooted to the spot, unable to do anything more than stare helplessly back at her, wondering where her sweet and loving Tally has gone. Had she done this? Had her lies and determination to hide the truth from Tally turned her into this? Into someone Sarah cannot even recognize? Had Sarah ruined yet another person that she loves? She doesn't want to see you, Wick says, and Sarah's head finally snaps back to look at her in surprise. What? She can hear the shock in her voice, the way it had cracked around the single syllable, and Wick just shrugs apologetically. I am sorry, General, she says again, but she doesn't want to see you. The day of Nicta's execution arrives, and the moment they put her up on the pike, the buzzing comes back. Sarah freezes momentarily, half expecting to be brought to her knees again, but the muzzle is still on, Nicta still incapable of doing any work. She forces herself to stare at Nicta, and where she has been expecting to feel a twisted sort of pleasure at seeing the woman shake with fear, dark eyes wide with unshed tears, and the muffled sounds of her still screaming from behind the muzzle, the only thing that Sarah feels is the overwhelming sense of wrongness. She does her best to ignore the buzzing, the poking and the prodding, but it only gets worse with every word she speaks. And by the time she readies her scourge for the first strike, it is taking every ounce of willpower that she has to remain focused on the task in front of her. Stop! Sarah almost stumbles over her feet at the sound of Tally's voice, scourge going limp at her side, and the buzzing instantly disappears as Tally begins to step forward, out of line, and towards Sarah. Her steps are assured, where Sarah's are shaky, body rigid and posture perfect, where Sarah is breathing heavily, and her eyes are still burning with anger, where Sarah knows that hers are wide-eyed and terrified. "What are you doing?" she asks, voice trembling, holding onto her scourge just a bit tighter, taking a step away from Tally. "I declare right of proxy," Tally speaks in perfect mother tongue, despite being absolutely terrible at mother tongue, and Sarah takes another step backward, as a ripple of shock goes through the crowd around her. My life for hers. Even Nicta, who had not stopped screaming since the moment she had been chained to the pike, is stunned into silence, and for a few moments the only sounds that Sarah can hear are the blood rushing through her ears and the singular thought racing through her mind. Not Tally, not Tally, not Tally, please, not Tally. Craven. She manages to get out, and she can feel the sting of tears in her eyes, but Tally looks at her with an utterly unaffected look on her face. She takes a cautious step towards her, hands unconsciously reaching out for Tally, and Tally eyes it with an almost disdainful look on her face. I don't want to hurt you. Tally just shrugs, shaking her head, and Sarah's worst fear, the fear that she is the one responsible for Tally being this way, the fear that she has ruined her, suddenly seems to be confirmed with Tally's next words. You already have. The first scourge strike comes before Sarah even realizes that Tally has moved, and she is barely able to knock it away with her own, before another one comes flying her way, and Sarah is suddenly forced backwards into a defensive stance, blocking strike after strike from a cadet who somehow seems to know her way around a scourge far better than she has ever been trained to do so. The buzzing comes back, loud and desperate, demanding Sarah's attention, and she can feel her focus slipping as the needling in her mind sharpens almost to the point of pain, and it is all she can do to wrap her skirt around Tally's foot and yank it hard, and Tally goes tumbling to the floor with an angry scream. She scrambles to her feet, arm already pulling back to release another skirt strike, when there is another scream, muffled and laced with work, and everyone in the hangar watches in shock as Tally suddenly freezes in place, eyes wide, arm tensed and shaking up in the air where it still holds the scourge. The buzzing goes away the instant Tally drops to the floor on her hands and knees, screaming in pain and clutching at her head. Sarah barely has time to register that the work is coming from the muzzled woman on the pike, before an eruption of flame bursts to life over Tally's head, and her red hair is melting away, being replaced by thick, dark hair with grey streaks, body changing to a shorter stature. And then, suddenly, Anacostia and Petra are rushing forward. And it is Nicta, not Tally, that they are grabbing and hauling to their feet. Nicta's nose is bleeding, and she is panting heavily at having been mentally forced out of her work. But Sarah only has eyes for the woman that had been chained to the pike, the woman that is currently being released by her coven, collapsing into the arms of her sisters. The unit falls to the ground, sitting as they hold the sobbing and distressed Tally, and Petra and Anacostia are dragging Nicta away, but Sarah is rooted to the spot. How could she not have seen this? How could she not have noticed that the Tally in front of her all that time wasn't her Tally? All the looks she had sent her way, the ones filled with anger and burning hatred, so hot that Sarah had choked on it. How had she not noticed? Her scourge clatters to the ground, legs carrying her over to the group of kneeling cadets before she realizes she is even moving. And before anyone can even speak, Tally springs to her feet, and she throws herself into Sarah's arms. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," Tally cries out, and Sarah wants to laugh hysterically, because of course, this sweet and foolish Tally, her Tally, thinks that this is something she needs to apologize for. "I'm so sorry," she gasps out again, and she pulls back just enough to meet Sarah's gaze, tears spilling over her cheeks. "I tried to let you know it was me. I could still feel the bond, but it was muffled, so I was loud. I was so loud, Sarah, and then they took the muzzle off of me, and I was too loud, and I think I hurt you." She continues rambling on as a horrible realization comes to Sarah. The buzzing, the feeling of wrongness, all the desperate pleas and cries for help that Tally had been sending, hurtling down the bond towards Sarah, dampened by the muzzle that she had been forced to wear, so all that had reached Sarah was a buzzing in the brain, a feeling of something being off. "How did you do work with the muzzle still on?" Sarah hears herself say, because no one, not even Sarah herself, had ever been able to perform any type of work while in a collar or muzzle. "She was going to kill you," Tally whispers, and there are more tears spilling down her cheeks as her hands twist into Sarah's jacket. "I don't know, I couldn't let her kill you." The execution had been delayed. With the acquisition of Nicta, the real Nicta, one who could not do work with a collar on, Wade had decided that an interrogation was in order. Nicta had smugly asked for Tally, and Sarah's outburst of anger had shaken the whole room before Wade and Petra both decided it was best if she was not present. She had been too tired to argue. She doesn't allow herself to break down, to finally feel everything that she has been feeling, from the events over the course of the past few days, until she is alone in her office, the biddies having gone to bed already. She had almost killed, had almost unknowingly executed Tally. She had looked at her with all the hate she felt in her heart for Nick de Batan, had sent anger her way that was supposed to be directed towards someone else. Sarah slumps down on the floor in front of her fireplace and cries. She should have told Tally the truth. None of this would have happened if she had just simply told her truth. The truth about Nicte and Liberia, the truth about her feelings, the truth about how she wanted more from Tally. She still wants it, but she knows she does not deserve it. She is not surprised when Tally later comes into her office without asking, without knocking. Sarah wearily stands up, and she moves across the room to lean back against her desk, swallowing back a sigh. "What are you doing here?" "I had to see you," Tally says, and there are already tears in her eyes. "I saw the way she was looking at you, and Abigail and Rael told me that she wouldn't even let you near her." "How did they not notice?" Sarah snaps angrily, and Tally's eyes widen just a touch. "They are your sisters. How did they not notice that it wasn't you?" "You didn't notice either," Tally yells back, and Sarah feels as if she has been slapped. "How could you ever think that I would look at you like that, Sarah? That I could ever hate you?" "I am a very easy person to hate," Sarah says, and Tally flinches. "Not to me. You aren't," she says stubbornly, "and after everything we have been through, I still don't know how you could think that I would ever treat you that way." "Because of how I treated you," Sarah shouts, and it is Tally's turn to look as if she has just been slapped. "I used you and lied to you and sent you on that mission to punish you for looking too deeply into my past. Of course I thought you hated me." "But I don't," Tally cries out, and her lower lip is trembling now. "I don't hate you, Sarah. Don't." Sarah's eyes close, and a hand flies up to stop Tally before she can finish speaking. "Please, just don't." "Why not?" Tally practically whimpers. "I know you feel the same way, Sarah. I can feel it." "It does not matter." Sarah shakes her head and lowers her hand, but she does not open her eyes. She does not want to see if this Tally, the real Tally, is looking at her with well-deserved anger. "I may have spent the last several months loving you, Tally, but that did not seem to matter when you began to do things that I disagreed with. I grew frustrated with you, upset that you would not let it go, and I completely disregarded what you wanted, all so that I could cover up my past mistakes. That is not what love is, and I know that, but I cannot promise that it will not happen again." "I'm okay with that," Tally says instantly, and Sarah's eyes finally fly open. Tally's eyes are not filled with anger, but they are instead soft and desperate, pleading with Sarah not to push her away, and somehow that is worse than the hatred and animosity that Nicte had looked at her with through Tally's eyes. "I am not," Sarah says softly, and she stands up, pushing away from the desk and Tally. "You have already been hurt enough because of me, and I would never forgive myself if it happened again, not when I am simply supposed to be loving you instead." She straightens to her full height, pulling her hands behind her back. "I don't want to hurt you anymore." Tally shrugs helplessly, tears streaming down her cheeks as she shakes her head, and when she speaks, her voice is a barely choked out whisper. "But you already have."
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.